Hello, 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 hello. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Randy, and I'm an audio engineer who produces audiobooks on the side. I decided to combine my love of ASMR and audiobook production into this channel. Here, as an interim between longer works, I have for you a beautiful copy of Aesop's illustrated Fables. I had a different copy of this book when I was a kid, and I remember cracking it open one day when I started to read it, and I couldn't stop reading it. I almost read it all the way through. It was almost like YouTube Shorts or Instagram Reels to me, because each story was so short and easy to finish, and I just kept on wanting to go to the next one and the next one and the next one. This copy, however, was a gift. Look at that. So shiny it has clear. Slow and steady wins the race. The tortoise and the hare. I think this book is just gorgeous, and I think I would be remiss not to share it with you guys. Since I read all the stories as a kid, this is the first time I'm cracking it open myself. It's nice and crackly still. It has some really nice page turning sounds too. Aesop's illustrated Fables. This reminds me of Redwall, with illustrations by Walter Crane, Ernest Grissett, and Arthur Rackham. Barnes & Noble, New York. My childhood copy was a Barnes & Noble edition as well, although not nearly as beautiful as this one. Aesop's Fables. Could this be Aesop himself? Please pardon if you hear car noises in the background. I really tried doing this at the quietest part of night. It looks like the classic fox and the grapes illustration here. And it looks like there's going to be lots of full page illustrations and color plates for us to see as well. The Fables swallowed it down with the utmost relish, supposing it to be an egg. Soon afterward, suffering great pain in his stomach, he said, I deserve all this torment for my folly in thinking that everything round must be an egg. They who act without sufficient thought will often fall into unsuspected danger. That lesson was clear enough, I think. The Woman and the Hen. A woman had a hen that laid an egg every day. The fowl was of a superior breed, and the eggs were very fine and sold for a good price. The woman thought that by giving the hen twice as much food as she had been in the habit of giving, the bird might be brought to lay 2 eggs a day instead of 1. So the quantity of food was doubled. The hen thereupon grew very fat and stopped laying altogether. Figures are not always facts. The Wolf and the Lamb. A hungry wolf one day saw a lamb drinking at a stream below him and wished to find some excuse for eating her. What do you mean by muddying the water I am going to drink? Said he fiercely to the lamb. Pray forgive me, meekly answered the lamb. I should be sorry in any way to displease you, but as the stream runs from you towards me, you will see that I am not to blame. That's all very well, said the wolf, but you know you spoke ill of me behind my back a year ago. Nay, believe me, replied the lamb, I was not then born. It must have been your brother then, growled the wolf. It cannot have been, for I never had any, answered the lamb. I know it was one of your lot, rejoined the wolf, so make no more such idle excuses. He then seized the poor lamb, carried her off to the woods, and ate her. The wicked always finds an excuse for wrongdoing. Jupiter and the Bee. A bee made Jupiter a present of a pot of honey, which was so kindly taken that the god bade her ask what she would, and that it should be granted her. The bee then desired that wherever she should set her sting, it might wound to the death. Jupiter was loath to leave mankind at the mercy of a spiteful little insect, and was annoyed at the ill nature of her wish. He therefore said that while, for his promise's sake, he would give her the power to harm, she must be careful how she used the power, for where she planted her sting she would leave it, and with it lose her life. Evil brings evil in return. The Wolf, the She-Goat, and the Kid. A she-goat, leaving her house one morning to look for food, told her kid to bolt the door and to open to no one who did not give us a password, a plague on the wolf and all his tribe. A wolf who was lurking about, unseen by the goat, heard her words, and when she was gone, came and tapped at the door, and imitating her voice, said, a plague on the wolf and all his tribe. He made sure that the door would be opened at once, but the kid, whose suspicions were aroused, replied, show me your beard, and I will let you in at once. Double proof is surest. All the different animals in Aesop's fables take on different personalities and roles in the stories. For example, famously, the fox is very sly and slinky, and the wolf is almost always the bad guy. The Bat and the Weasels. A weasel seized upon a bat who begged hard for her life. No, no, said the weasel, I give no quarter to birds. Birds, cried the bat, I'm no bird, I'm a mouse. Look at my body. And so she got off that time. A few days after, she fell into the clutches of another weasel. The bat cried for mercy. No, You can see from my wings that I am a bird, and she escaped that time as well. It is good to have two strings to one's bow. The dogs and the hides. Some dogs, famished with hunger, saw some cowhides steeping in a river. Not being able to reach them, they agreed to drink up the river, but it fell out that they burst themselves with drinking long before they reached the hides. Attempt not impossibilities. The Wanton Calf. A calf full of play and wantonness, seeing an ox at the plough, could not forbear insulting him. "What a sorry old drudge you are," said he, "to bear that heavy yoke upon your neck, and with a plough at your tail all day, to go turning up the ground for a master. You are a wretched slave, and know no better, or you would not do it. See what a happy life I lead. I go just where I please, sometimes in the cool shade, sometimes in the warm sunshine, and whenever I like, I drink at the clear running brook." The ox, not at all moved by this address, went on quietly and calmly with his work, and in the evening, when unyoked and going to take his rest, he saw the calf being led off by the butcher. He pitied him, but could not help but saying, as he passed, "Now, friend, whose condition is the better, yours or mine?" Youth and folly often live together. The Fighting Cocks. Two cocks fought for the sovereignty of the farmyard. One was severely beaten and ran and hid himself in a hole. The conqueror flew to the top of an outhouse. There clapped his wings and cried out, "Victory!" Just then an eagle made a swoop, seized him, and carried him off. The other, seeing this from his hiding place, came out, and, shaking off his recollection of his late disgrace, strutted about among his hands with all the dignity imaginable. Bear success with moderation. The Lion's Share. The lion and several other beasts once agreed to live peaceably together in the forest, sharing equally all the spoils of hunting. One day, a fine fat stag fell into a snare set by the goat, who thereupon called the rest together. The lion divided the stag into 4 parts. Taking the best piece for himself, he said, "This is mine, of course, as I am the lion." Taking another portion, he added, "This too is mine by right, the right, if you must know, of the strongest." Further, putting aside the 3rd piece, "That's for the most valiant," said he, "and as for the remaining part, touch it if you dare." Might makes right. I wonder if the idiom, "the lion's share," came from this story. I'm a big fan of idioms. The ass, the ape, and the mole. An ass and an ape were one day grumbling together over their grievances. "My ears are so long that people laugh at me," said the ass. "I wish I had horns like the ox." "And I," said the ape, "am really ashamed to turn my back upon anyone. Why should not I have a fine bushy tail as well as that saucy fellow the fox?" "Hold your tongues, both of you," said a mole that overheard them, "and be thankful for what you have. The poor moles have no horns at all, no tail to speak of, and are nearly blind as well. We should never complain so long as there are others worse off than ourselves." Looks like here's our first big illustration of the lion, the tiger, and the fox. A lion and a tiger happened to come together over the dead body of a fawn that had been recently shot. A fierce battle ensued, and as each animal was in the prime of his age and strength, the combat was long and furious. At last they lay stretched on the ground panting, bleeding, and exhausted, each unable to lift a paw against the other. An impudent fox coming by at the time stepped in and carried off before their eyes the prey on account of which they had both fought so savagely. Woe betide us, said the lion, that we should suffer so much to serve a fox. It often happens that one has the toil and another the profit. Classic fox. The cat and the mice. A certain house was much infested by mice. The owner brought home a cat, a famous mouser, who soon made such havoc among the little folk that those who were left stayed closely in the upper shelves. Then the cat grew hungry and thin, and, driven to her wits' end, hung by her hind legs from a peg in the wall, and pretended to be dead in order that the mice would no longer be afraid to come near her. An old mouse came to the edge of the shelf and, seeing through the trick, cried out, "Aha, Miss Pussy, we should not come near you even if your skin were stuffed with straw. Old birds are not to be caught with chaff." I'm sure this lesson would make more sense if I knew what chaff was, and what it had to do with birds. Might as well be old mice are not to be caught with dead cats. The two frogs. Two frogs lived in the same pool. The hot summer came and dried it up, so that they were forced to set forth in search of other water. As they went along, they chanced to find a deep well full of cool water. "Let us jump in here," cried one of the frogs. "Wait a bit," said the other. "If that should dry up, how could we get out again?" Easier in than out. Ooh, color. The peacock's complaint. The peacock complained to Juno that while everyone laughed at his voice, an insignificant creature like the nightingale had a note that delighted all listeners. Juno, angry at the unreasonableness of her favorite bird, scolded him in the following terms. "Envious bird that you are, I'm sure you have no cause to complain. On your neck shine all the colors of the rainbow, and your extended tail gleams like a mass of gems. No living being has every good thing to its own share. The falcon is endowed with swiftness, the eagle strength, the parrot speech, the raven the gift of augury, and the nightingale a melodious note, while you have both size and beauty. Cease then to complain, or the gifts you have shall be taken away. Contentment should be the source of every joy." That one I do agree with. The man and his two wives. In a country where men could have more than one wife, a certain man, whose head was fast becoming white, had two, one a little older than himself, and one much younger. The young wife, being of a gay and lively turn, did not want people to think that she had an old man for a husband, and so used to pull out as many of his white hairs as she could. The old wife, on the other hand, did not wish to seem older than her husband, and so used to pull out the black hairs. This went on until between the two they made the poor man quite bald. No man can belong to two parties at once. At least he loved both of his wives enough to let them pluck out all his hairs. The Countryman and the Snake. A countryman, one frosty day in the depth of winter, found a snake under a hedge almost dead with cold. Taking pity on the poor creature, he brought it home and laid it on the hearth near the fire. Revived by the heat, it reared itself up, and with dreadful hissings flew at the wife and children of its benefactor. The countryman, hearing their cries, rushed in, and, seizing a mattock, soon cut the snake in pieces. "Vile wretch," said he, "is this the reward you make to him who saved your life? Die as you deserve, but a single death is too good for you. Ingratitude is a crime." The Kite and the Pigeons. A kite that had kept sailing around a dovecote looking for a nice fat pigeon for many days, to no purpose, was forced by hunger to have recourse to stratagem. Approaching the pigeons in his gentlest manner, he tried to show them how much better their state would be if they had a king with some firmness about him, and how well his protection would shield them from the attacks of the hawk and other enemies. The pigeons, deluded by this show of reason, admitted him to the dovecote as their king. They found, however, that he thought it part of his kingly prerogative to eat one of their number every day, and they soon repented of their credulity in having let him in. "Ah," they exclaimed in despair, "we deserved no better. Why did we heed the counsel of an enemy?" Trust not your security to one who puts his own interests first. The Two Crabs. "My dear," called out an old crab to her daughter one day, "why do you sidle along in that awkward manner? Why don't you go forward like other people?" "Well, mother," answered the young crab, "it seems to me that I go exactly like you do. Go first and show me how, and I will gladly follow. Example is better than precept." I'm not sure what to make of this image. I can only assume it's two crabs, but they're just so disturbing looking. Why'd they give them feet and toes? And little hands that looked like crab claws. They dressed them up in clothes and made them round. I can't look at it anymore. This one's much better. The hawk with a sword strapped to his belt, very cool, and the nightingale. A nightingale once fell into the clutches of a hungry hawk who had been all day on the lookout for food. "Pray let me go," said the nightingale. "I am such a mite for a stomach like yours. I sing so nicely too. Do let me go. It will do you good to hear me." "Much good it will do an empty stomach," replied the hawk. "And besides, a little bird that I have caught is more to me than a great one that is yet to be caught. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush." Classic lesson. The body and its members. The members of the body once rebelled against him. They said he led an idle, lazy life at their expense. The hands declared that they would not again lift a crust even to keep him from starving. The mouth that it would not take in a bit more food. The legs that they would carry him about no longer, and so on with the others. The body quietly allowed them to follow their own courses, well knowing that they would all soon come to their page flip senses, as indeed they did when, for want of the blood and nourishment supplied from the stomach, they found themselves fast becoming mere skin and bone. No one can live to himself, but must take account of his neighbor's needs. Pretty sure blood and nourishment aren't supplied from the stomach, but nourishment is supplied by blood, which is, technically supplied by the stomach. The nourishment, I mean, not the blood. But I guess the Romans were onto something. I mean, they thought blood came from the stomach, but at least they knew that nourishment came from there. The spendthrift and the swallow. A prodigal son, a prodigal young fellow who had run through all his money and even sold all his outer clothes except his cloak, saw a swallow skimming over the meadows one fine day in the early spring. Believing that summer was really come, he sold his cloak too. The next morning there happened to be a severe frost, and, shivering and nearly frozen himself, he found the swallow lying stiff and dead upon the ground. He thereupon upbraided the poor bird as the cause of all his misfortunes. "Stupid thing," said he, "had you not come before your time, I should not now be so wretched. Be not ready to believe rumors." That's kind of relatable. You can't trust the weather in my state. The stag at the pool. A stag, drinking in a clear pool, admired the handsome look of his spreading antlers, but was much displeased at the slim and ungainly appearance of his legs. "What a glorious pair of branching horns," said he. "How gracefully they hang over my forehead. What a fine air they give my face. But as for my spindle shanks of legs, I am heartily ashamed of them." The words were scarcely out of his mouth when he saw some huntsmen and a pack of hounds making towards him. His despised legs soon placed him at a distance from his followers, but, on entering the forest, his horns got entangled at every turn, so that the dogs soon reached him and made an end of him. "Fool that I was," he gasped at his last breath. "Had it not been for those wretched horns, my legs would have saved my life." Beauty may have fair leaves and bitter fruit. The jackdaw and the pigeons. A jackdaw, seeing how well some pigeons in a certain dovecote fed, and how happily they lived together, wished much to join them. With this view, he whitened his feathers, and slipped in one evening just as it was getting dark. As long as he kept quiet, he escaped notice, but, growing bolder by degrees, and feeling very jolly in his new quarters, he burst into a hearty laugh. His voice betrayed him. The pigeons set upon him and drove him out. When he would afterwards have joined the jackdaws again, his discolored feathers and battered state drew attention to him, and his former mates, finding out what he had been at, would let him have no further part with them. He who pursues two courses succeeds with neither. The fox without a tail. Here he is, and his tail caught in a trap. A fox was once caught in a trap by his tail, and in order to get away, was forced to leave it behind. Knowing that without a tail, he would be a laughingstock for all his fellows, he resolved to try to induce them to part with theirs. So at the next assembly of foxes, he made a speech on the unprofitableness of tails in general, and the inconvenience of a fox's tail in particular, adding that he had never felt so easy as since he had given up his own. When he had sat down, a sly old fellow rose, and waving his long brush with a graceful air, said, with a sneer, that if, like the last speaker, he had lost his tail, nothing further would have been needed to convince him, but till such an accident should happen, he should certainly vote in favor of tails. Guard against those who would wish you to be reduced to their own level. I have to admit, I'm a fan of giving predatory animals daggers and swords. It's just so cool. The mischievous dog. a rascally dog, used to run quietly to the heels of every passerby and bite them without warning. So his master was obliged to tie a bell around the cur's neck, that he might give notice wherever he went. This the dog thought very fine indeed, and he went about tinkling it in pride all over town. But an old hound said, "Why do you make such a fool of yourself? That bell is not a mark of merit, but of disgrace." Notoriety is often mistaken for fame. I believe that's what we call infamy. The Collier and the Fuller. A friendly collier meeting one day with the fuller, an old acquaintance of his, kindly invited him to come and share his house. "1,000 thanks for your civility," replied the fuller, "but I am rather afraid that as fast as I make anything clean, you will be smutting it again. Good conduct is often corrupted by false knowledge." This one I will admit I do not understand. I suppose it would make more sense if I knew what occupation a collier and a fuller were, but I really don't know. The Bald Knight. A certain knight who wore a wig to conceal his baldness was out hunting one day. A sudden gust of wind carried away his wig and showed his bald pate. His friends all laughed heartily at the odd figure he made, but the old fellow, so far from being put out, laughed as heartily as any of them. "Is it any wonder," said he, "that another man's hair shouldn't keep on my head when my own wouldn't stay there? Every event has its reason." They really said it was your destiny that your wig be snatched. You just weren't meant to have hair, my guy. The Eagle and the Crow. A crow watched an eagle swoop with a majestic air from a cliff upon a flock of sheep and carry away a lamb in its talons. The whole thing looked so graceful and so easy that the crow at once proceeded to imitate it, and, pouncing upon the back of the largest and fattest ram he could see, he tried to make off with it. He found that he could not move the ram, and his claws got so entangled in the animal's fleece that he could not get away himself. He therefore became an easy prey to the shepherd, who, coming up at the time, caught him, cut his wings, and gave him to his children for a plaything. They came crowding about their father, and asked him what strange bird that was. "Why," he said, "he'll tell you himself that he's an eagle, but you take my word for it. I know him to be a crow. 'Tis folly to attempt what you are unable to perform." I liked that one. That was fun. The Owl and the Nightingale. A formal, solemn owl had for many years made his habitation in a grove amongst the ruins of an old monastery, and had pored so often over some mouldy manuscripts, the stupid relics of a monkish library, that he grew infected with the pride and pedantry of the place. Mistaking gravity for wisdom, he would sit whole days with his eyes half shut, fancying himself profoundly learned. It happened as he sat one evening, half buried in meditation and half in sleep, that a nightingale, unluckily perching near him, began her melodious lays. He started from his reverie, and with a horrid screech interrupted her song. "Begone," cried he, "thou impertinent minstrel, nor distract with noisy dissonance my sublime contemplations, and know, vain songster, that harmony consists in truth alone, which is gained by laborious study, and not in languishing notes, fit only to suit the ear of a lovesick maid." "Conceited pedant," returned the nightingale, "whose wisdom lies only in the feathers that muffle up thy unmeaning face. Music is a natural and rational entertainment and though not adapted to the ears of an owl, has ever been relished and admired by the best-formed minds. It is natural for a pedant to despise those arts that polish our manners, and that would extirpate pedantry. This one is a little complicated. The spider and the silkworm. A spider, busied in spreading his web from one side of the room to the other, was asked by an industrious silkworm to what end he spent so much time and labor in making such a number of lines and circles. The spider angrily replied, "Do not disturb me, thou ignorant thing. I transmit my ingenuity to posterity, and fame is the object of my wishes." Just as he had spoken, Susan, the chambermaid, coming into the room to feed her silkworms, saw the spider at his work, and with one stroke of her broom, swept him away and destroyed at once his labors and hopes of fame. He that is employed in works of use generally advantages himself or others, while he who toils for fame alone must expect often to lose his labor. That one made sense. I think we'll do a couple more. Caesar and the slave. During a visit that Tiberius Caesar paid to one of his country residences, he observed that, whenever he walked in the crowds, a certain slave was always a little way ahead of him, busily watering the paths. Turn which way he would, go where he might, there was the fellow still fuzzing about with his watering pot. He felt sure that he was making himself thus needlessly officious in the hope of thereby gaining his liberty. In making a slave free, a part of the ceremony consisted in giving him a gentle stroke on one side of the face. Hence, when the man came running up in eager expectation at the call of the emperor, the latter said to him, "I have for a long time observed you meddling where you had nothing to do, and while you might have been better employed elsewhere. You are mistaken if you think I can afford a box on the ear at so low a price as you bid for it. Being busy does not always mean being useful." That was me at my first job. First job I worked, I was 16 and still in high school, of course. The minimum wage there, which I made, was $8.40. And that was before tax was taken out of it. So yeah, I did a lot of being busy at that job. The Man and the Lion. A man and a lion once argued together as to which belonged to the nobler race. The man called the attention of the lion to a monument on which was sculptured a man striding over a fallen lion. "That proves nothing at all," said the lion. "If a lion had been the carver, he would have made the lion striding over the man." Alright. I think we're gonna leave off here for tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed this interim. The next video to be published will be the start of a longer project, a novel, which will take the form of Stardust, although I like to have it all recorded before I start publishing. So it's going to take a while for that series to get started. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. I can't wait to get into the next one. I think I've made up my mind, and we're going to do The Color of Magic next. The first book in the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett. It is an extremely iconic book. when I read it for the first time, I read it because sometimes I have a lot of free time at my job. So when I read it for the first time, it reminded me a lot of D&D because it had that high fantasy setting, but such wacky things happened in it. It was exactly something that my D&D campaign would do. I could see it just being like, yeah, it's very wacky. But I'm really excited to share that with you, especially if you haven't read it before. It's such a classic book that I feel like a lot of people have enjoyed. But anyway, leave a comment